Sign it. You're nothing without me, and you'll be nothing after me. Mark Sterling threw the divorce papers across the kitchen table on the morning of his wife's graduation, then reached over and tore her ceremony invitation in half. 8 years I carried you. 8 years I paid for your little dreams while you played scientist in some basement lab. You were a burden, Serena, a weight around my neck. She said nothing. She simply looked at him. Because in 6 hours, Serena Vance would close an $850 million deal he knew nothing about. Before we go further, if stories about quiet strength and impossible comebacks move, you take a moment to subscribe to this channel and stay with me all the way to the end, because this one earns every minute. And tell me in the comments which city you're watching from right now, so I can see just how far Serena's story travels. The paper made a sound when it tore, a thin, ugly little sound like something being ripped out of the world that could never be put back. Mark Sterling held the two halves of the graduation invitation over the table for a second longer than he needed to, as if he wanted her to watch, as if the watching was the point. Then he let them fall. Serena Vance did not reach for them. She kept her hands flat on the cool surface of the table, and she looked at the man she had married 8 years ago, and she felt something she had not expected to feel on this particular morning. She felt calm, a deep oceanic calm that surprised even her. "You don't have anything to say," Mark said. It wasn't a question. He said it the way he said most things to her lately, with a kind of bored contempt, as if her silence were just one more thing about her that disappointed him. "Of course you don't. You never do." "What time did you have the papers drawn up?" Serena said. He blinked. That wasn't the reaction he'd wanted. He'd wanted tears or begging, or at the very least the trembling lower lip she used to get when she was younger, and he could still make her feel small with a single sentence. "What?" "The papers," she said again calmly. "The date on the filing says 3 weeks ago. So you've been carrying these around for 3 weeks. I'm asking what time of day you finally decided to hand them to me. Was it planned? Did you pick the morning of my graduation on purpose, Mark, or did it just happen to line up that way?" He laughed a short, disbelieving sound. "Are you serious right now? I just told you our marriage is over and you want to talk about scheduling." "I want to understand you," she said. "I've spent 8 years trying to understand you. Humor me one more time." Something in her voice made him uneasy, though he could not have said why. He was a man who trusted the surface of things, and the surface of Serena had always been so easy to read. She was the quiet one, the tired one, the one who came home smelling faintly of the lab and disinfectant, who fell asleep on the couch with journals open on her chest, who never asked for anything and never seemed to expect anything either. He had built an entire understanding of who she was on the foundation of her silence, and he had never once thought to check whether that foundation was solid. "You know what, I'm not doing this," Mark said. He straightened his tie, the expensive one, the one she had bought him for his last promotion at the firm. "I have a meeting. Sign the papers. Leave them on the counter. Marcus will pick them up." "Marcus is your divorce attorney." "Marcus is my friend who happens to be a divorce attorney, and yes, he's handling this because I want it done cleanly and I want it done fast." Mark picked up his coffee and drank the last of it and set the mug down hard. "And before you get any ideas, Serena, don't. There's nothing to fight over. The apartment's in my name. The car's in my name. My income is my income. You've been a graduate student for, 6 years? You've got student debt and a diploma you're getting today, and that's it. That's the whole picture. So do us both a favor and don't embarrass yourself by lawyering up. You'll spend money you don't have chasing money that was always mine." Serena tilted her head slightly. "That's what you think the picture is?" "That is the picture." "Okay," she said. And she smiled. It was a small smile, almost gentle, and it unsettled him more than any of her tears ever had. "What's funny?" he demanded. "Nothing's funny," she said. "I'm agreeing with you. You have the apartment, you have the car, you have your income. That's the whole picture." She stood up from the table, smoothing the front of her blouse. "You should get to your meeting." He stood there a moment longer, and she could see him trying to find the trap, trying to locate the thing that was wrong with this scene, because something was wrong, and even a man as blind as Mark Sterling could feel it. But he couldn't name it, and Mark had never been comfortable with things he couldn't name, so he did what he always did. He got angry. "You know what your problem is," he said. "You never fought for us, not once. I've been drowning in this marriage for years, telling you I wasn't happy, telling you I needed more, and you just kept disappearing into that lab like I didn't exist. Do you know how that feels, to be married to a ghost?" "Tell me about her," Serena said. His face changed. "About who?" "The woman you've been seeing. You said you needed more. You clearly found it somewhere. So tell me about her. I'm curious." For the first time, Mark looked genuinely rattled. He hadn't planned to get into this. He'd planned to clean exit papers on the table, a righteous speech about how she'd failed him, and then out the door before she could turn it around on him. But she was so calm, and her calm was pulling the truth out of him against his will. "Her name's Vanessa," he said finally, and there was a defensiveness in it, an anticipation of an attack that never came. "She works in acquisitions at Halloran Capital. She's ambitious, Serena. She's going places. She understands the world I move in. She doesn't come home smelling like a chemistry set and fall asleep before 9. "How long? Does it matter? How long, Mark?" 8 months, he said. "Almost 9. Serena nodded slowly, absorbing it. 9 months. He'd been telling her he was working late, closing quarters, entertaining clients for 9 months. And she had known, of course. She had known for most of it. But she had made a decision a long time ago, back when she first understood what her husband actually was, that she would not spend the currency of her energy on him. Every ounce of rage she might have spent on Mark Sterling, she had instead poured into something else. Something that was, at this very moment, sitting in a data room, being reviewed by a team of lawyers on the 40th floor of a building 6 miles from where she stood. 9 months, she repeated. "So around the time we submitted the Series C paperwork." "The what?" "Nothing," she said. "You wouldn't remember." "Yeah, well." He picked up his briefcase. At least Vanessa's actually doing something with her life. And there it was. The line that years from now, when this story had spread to newspapers and podcasts and financial networks, would be quoted back to him 1,000 times. At least Vanessa's actually doing something with her life. Said to a woman who in a matter of hours would be doing more with her life in a single afternoon than Mark Sterling would accomplish across the entire span of his. But Serena didn't correct him. That was the thing about her that Mark had never understood, the thing that had made her seem weak to him, when in fact, it was the source of all her strength. She did not need to be seen to be true. She did not need his belief to make her real. For years he had mistaken her silence for absence, when it had always been the sound of a woman building something so enormous that she could not afford to let it be noticed before it was ready. "You're right," she said quietly. "Vanessa sounds like she's doing something. I hope it works out for you both." Mark stared at her. He had come into this kitchen expecting a war, and instead he'd gotten a benediction, and it left him strangely hollow the way a punch thrown at empty air leaves the shoulder aching. "That's it," he said. "That's all you have to say." "What did you want me to say?" "I don't know. Something. Anything. 8 years, Serena, and you're just going to let me walk out the door like I'm the mailman." And here, finally, she let a little of the truth show through. Not all of it. Just a sliver, just enough to plant a seed that would grow into a very large and terrible tree in his mind over the coming weeks. "Mark," she said, "you keep saying you carried me, that you paid for my dreams, that you supported me for 8 years. She walked slowly to the counter and picked up her handbag, an old thing worn at the corners because she had never once spent money on herself when that money could be spent on the company instead. "I want you to hold on to that. I want you to remember very clearly that this is the story you're telling yourself today. That you were the one with all the money, and I was the burden. Remember it exactly the way you feel it right now, because I think you're going to want to know later precisely what you believed on the morning you tore up my graduation invitation. What is that supposed to mean?" She smiled again. "You have a meeting." He left. Of course he left. He was Mark Sterling, and he had never in his life been able to sit inside a moment that made him uncomfortable. He slammed the door behind him, and the sound of it echoed through the apartment that he thought was his, and that would within the year be revealed to have been carrying a second mortgage he'd taken out to fund lifestyle expenses he could no longer actually afford. But she didn't know that part yet. She would learn it later. For now, she stood alone in the kitchen and she let herself breathe. Then she took out her phone. There were 4 messages waiting for her. She read them in order. The first was from her chief scientific officer, a woman named Priya Nadar, who had been with her since the very beginning, since the days when Biowance Therapeutics was 3 people and a leased freezer in a converted warehouse in Long Island City. Priya's message said only final validation data locked. It's clean. It's beautiful. See you at the board meeting. We did it, Serena. The second was from her lead counsel. The message read, Chimera's team finished due diligence at 6 a.m. No red flags. Julian Thorne confirmed he's attending the board meeting personally. That's not normal. He never does that. Whatever you've built, it's got his full attention. The third was from the dean's office at Columbia, a routine reminder about the doctoral hooding ceremony, the time, the location, the instruction to arrive 30 minutes early. And the fourth was from her mother. Serena stopped when she saw it. Her mother had passed away 2 years ago, but Serena had never deleted the thread, and every so often she scrolled up to reread the old messages, the ones from the hard years, the ones that had kept her alive when everything else was falling apart. This time she scrolled up to a message from 4 years back, a message her mother had sent her at 3 a.m. when Serena had called crying because a major investor had pulled out and the company was 2 weeks from insolvency, and Mark had told her that very night that maybe it was time she gave up the science thing and got a real job. Her mother had written, "They laugh at the girl who builds in the dark. They don't laugh for long. You keep building, Mija. You don't owe anyone an explanation until the day the building is finished. And on that day, you don't explain. You just turn on the lights." Serena read it twice. Then she put the phone in her bag, picked up the 2 halves of her torn graduation invitation, and fit them back together on the counter, matching the edges. Mark had torn it clean down the middle through the crest of the university, through her own printed name. Dr. Serena Vance. She looked at the 2 pieces sitting side by side, almost whole again, and she felt no anger. She felt only a kind of quiet certainty, the certainty of a woman who has been underestimated for so long that she has stopped hoping to be seen and simply learned to build in the dark until the building could no longer be ignored. She would go to her graduation, she would receive her doctorate, and then she would walk into a boardroom on the 40th floor and turn on the lights. The drive to Columbia took 40 minutes in the morning traffic. Serena sat in the back of a car she had ordered on her phone, a car Mark did not know she could easily afford, because for years she had let him believe she took the subway to save money. She had taken the subway most days, but not to save money. She took it because the underground was quiet in a certain way, and the quiet was where she did her best thinking. And because a woman who is building an empire in secret learns to hide her resources the way a poker player hides a strong hand. You do not show what you're holding until the pot is large enough to be worth showing. Her phone rang. It was Priya. "You okay?" Priya asked. She always knew. 8 years of building something with a person, and you learn to hear the weather in their voice. "He served me this morning," Serena said. There was a silence on the line. Then Priya said very quietly, "Today. He served you divorce papers today, on graduation day, the day of the acquisition." "He didn't know about the acquisition. He still thinks I'm a struggling grad student living off his salary." "Serena." Priya's voice had gone tight and fierce, the way it did when the company was under attack. "I have watched that man treat you like a houseplant for as long as I've known you, and he chose today of all days to—" She stopped herself. "How are you not screaming? Because screaming spends energy," Serena said, "and I need all of it for the board meeting." Priya laughed a short, disbelieving laugh, the laugh of a person who has just watched someone do something completely impossible. "You are a machine. You know that you're a beautiful, terrifying machine." "I'm a scientist," Serena said. "I run the experiment. I don't cry over the beaker." "He is going to find out," Priya said. "Today, in hours. It's going to be everywhere. The deal, your name, all of it. He's going to be sitting in his little finance meeting, and his phone is going to start buzzing, and he is going to realize what he did, what he threw away. Serena, he is going to realize that this morning he told an $850 million founder that she was a burden." Serena looked out the window at the city sliding past. "I know. Doesn't that feel good?" And Serena thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. Did it feel good? She examined the feeling the way she'd examine a data set, looking for the true signal underneath the noise. "No," she said finally. It doesn't feel good. It feels quiet, like the end of a very long noise I've been living inside for 8 years, and now the noise is finally stopping, and there's just silence, and in the silence I can hear myself think for the first time in a decade." She paused. "That's better than good, Priya. Good is loud. This is quiet. I'll take quiet." The car pulled up to the campus. Serena thanked the driver and stepped out into the morning, and for a moment she just stood there, looking up at the buildings where she had spent the last several years of her life, pretending to be one thing while secretly becoming another. Because that was the double life, and no one had known the whole of it, not even Priya, not even her mother at the end. By day, Serena Vance was a doctoral candidate, a slightly tired, slightly invisible woman in the biomedical engineering program, the kind of student professors forgot the name of, the kind of person other students didn't bother to network with because she clearly wasn't going anywhere. She wore the same 3 sweaters. She ate lunch alone. She never went to the parties or the mixers or the conferences where careers were supposedly made. And by night and in the early mornings and in every hour she could steal from the world, she was the founder and chief executive of BioVance Therapeutics, a company she had incorporated in her 3rd year, funded first with the last of her mother's small savings, and then with a seed round she'd raised so quietly that no one in her department ever knew it happened. BioVance had built something the industry had been chasing for 30 years and failing to catch, a platform for treating rare genetic diseases, the orphan conditions that afflicted too few people to be profitable and so were left to languish while the pharmaceutical giants chased the next blockbuster. Serena had built a system that could target these diseases, dozens of them, hundreds eventually, with a precision that made the old approaches look like guesswork. She had done it because when she was 9 years old, her younger brother had died of one of these diseases, a condition so rare it didn't even have a proper name until she was in college, a condition for which there had never been, and still was not any treatment at all. She had watched him die over the course of 2 years, and she had made a promise at his bedside that no other family would have to watch what her family watched if she could help it. She had never told Mark this. She had never told most people this. It was the engine at the center of everything she had built, and she had kept it hidden, because some fires burn cleaner when you don't let the wind of other people's opinions get to them. Mark knew none of it. Mark thought she was studying to be a lab technician. He had actually said that to his mother at Thanksgiving, once said it right in front of Serena, laughing. She's going to be a lab tech, hopefully, if she ever finishes. And Serena had smiled and passed the potatoes because that afternoon she had closed a partnership with a research hospital in Boston that would validate her entire platform. And there is a certain freedom in being underestimated that people who have never experienced it will never understand. When the whole world has decided you're small, you can move through it like a shadow, and shadows can go anywhere. Her phone buzzed again, a text from Julian Thorne's assistant confirming the board meeting for 2 o'clock, confirming that Mr. Thorne would attend in person, and adding a line at the bottom that made Serena raise her eyebrows. "Mr. Thorne asked me to tell you he read your brother's file. He said to tell you he understands now why the science is so precise. He said he'll see you at 2. Serena stood very still. She had never told Julian Thorne about her brother. It wasn't in any of the pitch materials. It wasn't in the data room. She had built a wall between the personal and the professional so high that she'd almost forgotten there was anything behind it. But Julian Thorne was not an ordinary investor. He was famous for it, actually famous for reading everything, for digging past the numbers into the human beings who made them, for turning down deals that were financially perfect because he sensed the founder was building for the wrong reasons, and for backing deals that looked risky because he sensed the founder was building for the right ones. He had somehow found her brother. And instead of it being a liability, instead of it being the emotional weakness Mark would have mocked her for, this legendary ruthless man had read the file of a child who died 25 years ago and understood correctly that the grief of a 9-year-old girl had been forged over 2 decades into the most precise piece of medical technology his analysts had ever reviewed. Serena felt something rise in her throat, and for the first time all morning, her eyes stung. Not because of Mark, not because of the divorce papers or the torn invitation or the 8 wasted years, but because a stranger had seen the truth of what she was doing, had seen the boy at the center of it, and had honored him by saying his name. She wiped her eyes once quickly and put her shoulders back. "Okay, Danny. she said very softly to a brother who had been gone for 25 years. "Let's turn on the lights." She walked toward the ceremony, and across the city in a glass conference room where a deal was being discussed that had nothing to do with her. Mark Sterling was laughing at a colleague's joke, sipping his coffee, entirely unaware that the woman he had called a burden that morning was about to become one of the most powerful people in an industry he didn't even understand. He checked his phone, once saw nothing, and put it back in his pocket. It would start buzzing soon enough. The morning air was cool and the campus was filling with graduates and families, with photographers and flowers, and the particular electric happiness of a day that people had worked years to reach. Serena moved through it all quietly, the way she moved through everything unnoticed, unremarkable, a woman in a plain dress, carrying a worn handbag. A few of her classmates nodded at her, the polite, distant nod you give to someone whose name you can't quite recall. None of them knew. None of them had any idea that the quiet woman in their program had, over the last 3 years, built a company that was, as of this morning, valued at nearly $1 billion. But they would know by dinner. Everyone would know by dinner. She found her seat among the doctoral candidates and sat down, folding her hands in her lap. And as the ceremony began, as the names started to be called, Serena Vance did something she had not done in a very long time. She let herself feel it, all of it. The exhaustion of the years, the loneliness of the double life, the grief of the brother she'd lost, and the marriage she was losing, and underneath all of it, rising up through all of it, an enormous and quiet and unstoppable strength. They were going to call her name soon, Dr. Serena Vance. And she thought about the two halves of her invitation torn down the middle, sitting on the kitchen counter of an apartment she would never sleep in again. She thought about her mother's message. They laugh at the girl who builds in the dark. They don't laugh for long. Her phone was silent in her bag. Mark's phone was silent in his pocket. The whole world was silent, holding its breath in the last quiet hour before everything changed. Somewhere in the row ahead of her, a woman was crying with joy as her daughter's name was called. Serena watched, and she smiled, and she waited for her own name, and she thought about the boardroom on the 40th floor, and the 14 executives, and Julian Thorne, who never stood up in meetings, and the $850 million, and the years, all the years, the quiet, invisible, relentless years. And then a voice at the podium said, "Dr. Serena Vance." She rose, and the walk to the podium was the longest 30 seconds of her life, longer than any experiment, longer than any board vote. Because for the first time in years, she was being seen by a crowd, and the crowd did not know what it was looking at. To them, she was just another name on a long list. Dr. Serena Vance, a woman in a plain dress. They clapped politely, the same polite clap they gave everyone, and no one in that audience of thousands understood that they were applauding the founder of a company that would within hours be worth nearly $1 billion. The dean placed the doctoral hood over her shoulders. He shook her hand. He said quietly, the way he said it to every candidate, "Congratulations, doctor." And Serena, who had not planned to say anything, who had planned to simply take the hood and the handshake and return to her seat like everyone else, found herself leaning in and saying something she would think about for a long time afterward. "Thank you," she said, "for not asking me what I was going to do with it." The dean looked at her surprised, and something flickered across his face, a recognition he couldn't place. "Should I have—" "No," Serena said. "Everyone else did. You were the only one who just let me finish." She walked back to her seat, and she sat down, and she pressed her doctoral hood flat with both hands. And she did not cry, because crying spent energy, and she needed all of it. But something inside her had shifted permanently, the way a bone that has been broken and healed is never quite the same bone again. 25 years of building, 2 years of watching her brother die, 8 years of a marriage in which she'd been treated like furniture, and now in the span of a single morning, it was all collapsing into one sharp point of time, one afternoon, one boardroom. Her phone buzzed. She slipped it from her bag and read the screen. It was Priya. "Where are you? Julian Thorne just arrived at the building. 40 minutes early." "Serena, he never comes early. His whole team is scrambling. Something's happening. Get here." Serena stood quietly in the middle of the ceremony, and she walked out, not toward the reception, not toward the photographers, not toward the families waiting with flowers. She walked toward the exit and she took off her doctoral robe as she went, folding it neatly over her arm, and underneath it she was wearing the simple dark suit she'd chosen that morning, the one she'd chosen not for a graduation, but for a war. Because the graduation had never been the point. The graduation was the alibi. It was the reason she'd had for being downtown today, the reason no one had questioned her movements, the cover story, that let her build the most important day of her life in plain sight. Everyone thought she was just a woman getting her degree. Only Serena knew that the degree was the smallest thing that would happen to her today. Her car was waiting. She got in, and she told the driver the address. And as the campus fell away behind her, she took out her phone and made the first of the calls that would define the next several hours. "Priya," she said, "tell me everything. Why is Thorne early?" "I don't know," Priya said, and there was an edge of panic in her voice that Serena had learned over 8 years to take very seriously. "His assistant just said he wanted extra time before the meeting, but that's not the thing, Serena. That's not the thing I'm worried about." "What's the thing?" Chimera brought 2 extra people who weren't on the original list, their heads of intellectual property and their senior litigation counsel. Serena went very still in the back of the car. "Litigation counsel." "Yeah. They don't bring litigation counsel to a friendly acquisition," Serena said slowly. "They bring litigation counsel when they think there's a problem with the assets, when they think somebody's going to sue over ownership." "That's what I thought. Who would sue over ownership of Biowance?" Serena said half to herself. "The IP is clean. Every patent is in the company's name. Every employee signed the assignment agreements. There's nobody who could possibly—" And then she stopped, because there was somebody. There was one person who might, if he understood what was happening, if he learned the truth before the deal closed, try to claim that some part of Biowance Therapeutics belonged to him, her husband. Serena leaned back against the seat and closed her eyes for a moment, and she did the math, the cold, fast, terrible math that had kept her company alive through 8 years of near-death experiences. Mark had filed for divorce 3 weeks ago. If Mark somehow learned about the deal before it closed, before the divorce was final, he could argue that Biowance was marital property, that because it had been built during their marriage, he was entitled to a portion of it. And in New York, in an equitable distribution state, a clever enough lawyer might be able to freeze the entire acquisition while the courts sorted it out. Chimera would never close a deal with that kind of legal cloud hanging over it. Julian Thorne would walk. 8 years of work would evaporate in a single afternoon, not because the science failed, not because the numbers didn't work, but because a man who thought she was a burden might discover in the worst possible moment that she was worth $850 million. "Priya," Serena said, and her voice was different now, low and controlled and moving very fast. "I need you to call our counsel. Right now. I need to know exactly when my divorce filing was entered, and I need to know the marital property implications for a company incorporated during the marriage, but funded entirely by premarital and inherited assets. And I need it in 20 minutes, because if Chimera brought litigation counsel, they already know something we don't, and I am not walking into that room blind. On it! And Priya." Serena opened her eyes. "Does Mark know? Is there any way he could have found out?" There was a pause, and in that pause, Serena felt the floor of her stomach drop, because Priya was not a woman who paused. Priya was a woman who answered. "There's something I have to tell you," Priya said. "And I should have told you sooner, and I didn't, because you had the graduation, and you had the deal, and I didn't want to add to it. But I have to tell you now." "Tell me." 3 days ago, a man called the office. He said he was from a financial services firm doing a routine credit review, and he asked to confirm whether a Serena Vance was affiliated with Biowance Therapeutics. Our receptionist, she's new, she didn't know the protocol, she said yes, just confirmed it, and then the man hung up. Serena's grip tightened on the phone. "What firm?" "That's the thing. She wrote down the name he gave. It was Halloran Capital." The car went silent. The city slid past the windows. And Serena Vance, who had not felt anger all morning, who had watched her husband tear up her graduation invitation, and felt only calm, felt something now begin to burn in her chest, cold and clean and precise, like liquid nitrogen. Halloran Capital, where Vanessa worked. Vanessa, the woman Mark had been seeing for 9 months. Vanessa, who worked in acquisitions, who understood the world Mark moved in, who was ambitious and going places. He knows, Serena said quietly. Or she knows and she told him. Vanessa found BioVance. Maybe she was doing diligence on an unrelated deal and stumbled onto it, or maybe Mark let something slip, or maybe... She stopped. It didn't matter how. What mattered was the shape of it. Vanessa works in acquisitions. She would understand exactly what an $850 million deal means. And Mark filed for divorce 3 weeks ago, which means he filed after his girlfriend's firm confirmed I was connected to a company about to be acquired. He didn't file because he fell out of love with me, Priya. He filed because he found out I was about to be rich, and he wanted to be divorced before it closed, so he'd look clean, so he could come back later and argue for a piece of it without looking like a gold digger. Isolde. Serena. No, wait, that's not right either. Serena was moving fast now, faster than the car, her mind assembling the pieces. If he wanted a piece of it, he'd want to stay married until it closed. Divorce filed before the deal marital property is still marital property. He'd have a claim either way. Unless... She stopped. Unless he doesn't understand the timing. Unless Vanessa understands it and Mark doesn't. Unless she's playing him. What do you mean, playing him? I mean, Serena said slowly, that a woman who works in acquisitions, who is ambitious and going places and understands this world, does not accidentally date the husband of a woman who's about to sell a company for nearly $1 billion. Think about it, Priya. Think about the timing. 9 months ago, right around when we filed the Series C paperwork, which is public, which anyone doing diligence in the biotech acquisition space could have seen if they knew where to look. 9 months ago, a woman named Vanessa at Halloran Capital started dating my husband. My quiet, invisible, struggling graduate student self was at that exact moment becoming visible in exactly one place in the world, the place where people like Vanessa go looking. The line was silent. Then Priya said in a voice gone hollow, "You think she targeted him? You think she found out about you first, and then she found Mark and she—" "I think," Serena said, "that my husband believes he seduced an ambitious young woman who understood him better than his boring wife. And I think the truth is that an ambitious young woman found a soft, vain, easily flattered man who happened to be married to a fortune he didn't know existed, and she has been steering him gently for 9 months toward exactly this outcome. The divorce, the claim, the lawsuit, and Mark thinks it's his idea. Mark thinks he's the one in control." Serena almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He's not carrying a burden, Priya. He's being carried. He's the pawn. He's always been somebody's pawn. I just didn't want to see it because for 8 years I was too busy building to look at him clearly." She was quiet for a moment. Then softly she said the thing that mattered most. "Which means Chimera's litigation counsel isn't there because of me. They're there because Halloran Capital or someone connected to it has already reached out to signal a potential ownership dispute. They're trying to spook Chimera. They're trying to freeze the deal or scare Thorne into walking so they can swoop in and buy BioVance for a fraction of what it's worth after the acquisition collapses and the company's in distress. That's the play. That's the whole play. Get Mark to file. Signal a marital property claim. Panic Chimera. Kill the deal. Then buy the wreckage cheap." "Serena," Priya's voice was shaking. "That's brilliant and it's evil and it might actually work. What do we do? The meeting's in a pause at 34 minutes. "We do what we always do," Serena said. "We run the experiment, we control the variables, and we do not under any circumstances panic." She sat forward. "Get counsel on the phone. I want to know the exact legal status of the divorce and the property, and I want to know it in 10 minutes, not 20. Then I want you to pull the incorporation documents, the funding records, and the source of every dollar that ever went into BioVance. Every single dollar, Priya. Where it came from, whose name was on it, the date. Because if Mark's lawyer or Vanessa's people want to argue that this company is marital property, I am going to walk into that boardroom and prove to the penny that not 1 cent of Mark Sterling's money ever touched my company. Not 1 cent. I made sure of that 8 years ago, and I need to make sure of it again right now. Why did you make sure of it 8 years ago? Priya asked. You couldn't have known this would happen. And Serena was quiet, and then she told Priya something she had never told anyone. Because my mother told me to, she said. When I incorporated Biowance, my mother was still alive, and she came to me and she said, Mija, whatever you build it with your own hands and your own money and none of his. Not because you don't love him, not because you don't trust him, but because a woman should own the thing she makes all the way down to the ground so that no man can ever stand on it and call it his. And I listened to her, Priya. I used the last of her savings and my brother's memorial fund and a seed round. I raised myself, and I never took $1 from Mark, never let him invest, never even let him know how much money was moving through the company, because my mother told me that the day would come when a man would try to stand on the thing I built and call it his. And on that day, I would need the ground to be entirely my own. The line was silent for a long moment. Your mother, Priya said finally, was a very smart woman. My mother, Serena said, buried a 9-year-old son and outlived a husband who left her with nothing, and she taught her daughter how to survive in a world that takes everything from women who don't hold on with both hands. Yeah, she was smart. Serena looked out the window. Now let's go prove her right. Get me counsel. 10 minutes. She hung up. The car moved through the city. Serena took out a small notebook, the paper kind, because she'd learned long ago that when everything is falling apart, there is a clarity that comes from writing things down by hand. She wrote 3 columns. In the first, she wrote what she knew. In the second, what she suspected. In the third, what she needed to prove in the next 30 minutes to save 8 years of her life. And as the columns filled, the panic that any ordinary person would have felt drained out of her, replaced by the thing that had always been her true nature, the thing Mark had mistaken for coldness, the thing Priya called terrifying, focus, absolute, total, unbreakable focus. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then instinct told her to. Serena Vance, she said. Dr. Vance. The voice was low, measured, amused, the voice of a man who was never in a hurry because the world had learned to wait for him. This is Julian Thorne. Serena sat up straight. Mr. Thorne, I'm on my way. I'll be there in... I know where you are. I know you left your graduation early. I know you took off your robe in the car. A pause. I had you followed this morning, Dr. Vance. I hope you'll forgive me. I don't invest $850 million in people I haven't watched under pressure. Serena's mind raced. And what did you see? I saw a woman receive divorce papers at 7 this morning and close them into a drawer without her hand shaking. I saw her accept a doctorate at 11 and walk out before the applause finished. And I saw her 20 minutes ago figure out in the back of a car that someone is trying to sabotage her deal and start solving it instead of crying about it. Another pause. You want to know what I think, Dr. Vance? I think you're going to tell me regardless. He laughed quietly. I think your husband is the least interesting person in this entire situation, and I think you already know that. I think the interesting person is the woman at Halloran Capital. And I think you and I are about to walk into a room where 14 very expensive people are going to try to convince me that your company is too legally risky to buy. And I want to know before I sit down at that table whether you're going to fold or whether you're going to fight. Serena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Mr. Thorne, can I ask you something first? Go ahead. Why did you read my brother's file? The line went silent. And when Julian Thorne spoke again, his voice had changed, the amusement gone out of it, replaced by something older and quieter. Because I read every founder's story before I buy their company, he said. The numbers tell me what a company is worth. The story tells me whether the founder will still be standing in 5 years when the hard part comes. Most founders build companies to get rich. Those founders fold when things get hard, because once you're rich enough, why keep fighting? But some founders build companies because there's a dead person they made a promise to. And those founders, Dr. Vance, he paused. Those founders never fold, because they're not building for money. They're building for a ghost, and you cannot buy off a person who's building for a ghost. Believe me, I've tried. Serena closed her eyes. His name was Danny. I know, Julian Thorne said gently. I read the file, 2 years old when the symptoms started, 7 when he was diagnosed, 9 when he died, and a 9-year-old sister who sat by the bed the whole time. A pause. You built a machine to kill the disease that killed your brother, and you did it in secret, while your husband told his mother you'd be a lab tech someday. Did I get that right?" Serena did not answer for a moment because she could not trust her voice. Then she said, "You got it exactly right." "Then here's what's going to happen," Julian Thorne said, and the amusement came back into his voice, but underneath it now was steel. "I'm going to be in that room, and they're going to raise the ownership question, the marital property claim, the Halloran problem, all of it. And I am not going to say a word. I'm going to let them attack you from every direction for as long as they want. And you are going to stand there, and you are going to take it apart piece by piece in front of me. Because I already know the science is real. I already know the numbers work. The only thing I don't know, the only thing I came early to find out, is whether the woman who built this can hold a room full of people who want to destroy her. So, don't fold Dr. Vance. Fight. And if you fight the way I think you can, you're going to walk out of that building richer than your husband will be in 10 lifetimes. And he's going to spend the rest of his life knowing he handed you divorce papers on the morning of the best day you ever had." He paused one last time. "I'll see you at 2. Don't be late." He hung up. Serena sat very still in the back of the car. And then slowly, a smile spread across her face, the first real smile she'd allowed herself all day, and she said out loud to no one, "Danny, you would have liked that guy." Her phone buzzed. Priya with counsel on a conference line. "Serena," said her lead attorney, a sharp woman named Rebecca Cho, who had guided BioVance through 3 funding rounds and a dozen crises. "I've got answers and I've got a problem, and you need to hear both before you walk in. Give me the answers first. The company is legally clean. BioVance was funded entirely from 3 sources. Your inheritance from your mother, which is separate property under New York law. Your brother's memorial fund, which was established before your marriage, also separate. And a seed round from outside investors, which is corporate money, not marital. Not $1 of marital funds ever entered the company. You never commingled. You never let Mark invest. The company is legally as separate as a company can be. He has no claim to the equity." Serena exhaled. "That's what I thought. What's the problem?" "The problem," Rebecca said, "is appreciation. Under New York law, even separate property can generate marital claims if the appreciation in value during the marriage is due to the efforts of either spouse. And here's where it gets ugly. BioVance was worth almost nothing 8 years ago, and it's worth $850 million today, and all of that appreciation happened during your marriage. And Mark's lawyers are going to argue that some of that appreciation is attributable to marital effort, yours or his. Mostly they'll argue that the household support he provided the apartment, the living expenses, freed you up to build the company, and that therefore he's entitled to a share of the appreciation. He didn't support me, Serena said flatly. I paid my own way. He just never knew it because I let him believe he was paying for things while I quietly covered them myself. I have the records, every rent payment, every grocery bill. I kept the receipts, Rebecca. For 8 years, I kept every receipt because my mother told me to. There was a stunned silence on the line. You, Rebecca said slowly, kept 8 years of receipts, proving you paid your own expenses while letting your husband believe he was supporting you. Yes. Why would you do that? Why let him believe it if you were paying? And Serena said, because a man who thinks he's carrying you doesn't look too closely at what you're actually doing. He's too busy feeling generous. Mark spent 8 years feeling like a hero for supporting a wife who was in fact supporting herself and building a company worth nearly $1 billion right under his nose. His vanity was my camouflage, Rebecca. And now his vanity is going to be his downfall, because he's going to walk into a courtroom and swear under oath that he supported me, and I'm going to produce 8 years of receipts proving that every dollar he thinks he spent on me, I actually paid back into the household from my own account, and that he never contributed 1 cent of net support to my life or my company. She paused. He's going to perjure himself out of pure ego, and I'm going to let him. Rebecca Cho was quiet for a long moment. Then she said with something like awe, Serena, in 22 years of practicing family law, I have never met a client like you. You've never met a client whose mother buried a child and taught her daughter to hold on with both hands, Serena said. Now, the Halloran problem. Talk to me. Right. So here's the ugly part. Rebecca's voice sharpened. We got confirmation an hour ago. Halloran Capital filed a notice of interest in biotech therapeutics with the SEC yesterday afternoon. It's a standard signal that a firm is considering a competing bid or has concerns about a pending transaction. It's meaningless legally, but it's a shot across the bow. It tells Chimera, hey, there might be a problem here. Tread carefully. And combined with a whisper of a marital property dispute, it's designed to make Chimera nervous enough to either lower their offer or walk away. And the woman behind it, Vanessa Reyes, Vice President of Acquisitions at Halloran, and Serena. Rebecca hesitated. This is the part that's going to make you angry. I did some digging. Vanessa Reyes was assigned to the Halloran biotech coverage team 14 months ago. Your Series C filing became visible 11 months ago. She started dating your husband 9 months ago, and Halloran's internal deal notes, which I got a piece of through a source I'm not going to name, show that they identified Biovance as an acquisition target 10 months ago and flagged it as, quote, founder situation potentially exploitable spouse relationship monitor. The car went completely silent. Say that again, Serena said quietly. Founder situation potentially exploitable spouse relationship monitor. They knew Serena. 10 months ago, Halloran Capital identified your company as a target, identified your marriage as a vulnerability, and 1 month later, a vice president from their team started sleeping with your husband. This wasn't Mark falling in love. This wasn't even Mark being a fool, although he was. This was a corporate strategy. Vanessa Reyes was deployed. She has been running an operation on your husband for 9 months, feeding him just enough dissatisfaction to make him want out, timing his divorce filing to create maximum legal chaos around your deal, all so that Halloran could tank the Chimera acquisition and pick up your company for pennies on the dollar. Serena did not speak. Outside the window, the building was coming into view, now the glass tower where 14 executives and 1 legendary investor and 1 deployed corporate operative and the ghost of a 9-year-old boy were all about to occupy the same room. Serena, Priya said, are you there? Are you okay? And when Serena finally spoke, her voice was so calm, so quiet, so utterly without fear that both women on the line felt the hair rise on their arms. So let me make sure I understand the situation completely, Serena said. This morning, my husband told me I was a burden he'd carried for 8 years, and he tore up my graduation invitation, and he handed me divorce papers, and he thinks he's a free man walking away from a struggling grad student. He has no idea that the woman he's leaving is worth $850 million. He has no idea that the woman he's leaving me for was sent by a firm that identified my marriage as, what was the word, exploitable? He has no idea that he is not the hero of this story, or even the villain. He's the tool. He's the thing they used and are about to throw away, because the second this deal collapses and they've gotten what they wanted, Vanessa Reyes is going to drop Mark Sterling like a bad stock, and he's going to be alone, divorced, and poor, having thrown away a fortune he never even knew he was standing on. She paused. Do I have that right, Rebecca? You have it exactly right, Rebecca said quietly. Then here is what we're going to do, Serena said, and the car pulled up to the curb, and she opened the door, and she stepped out onto the sidewalk in front of the glass tower, with her doctoral hood folded over her arm and her worn handbag on her shoulder, and 8 years of receipts in a cloud file, and the memory of her brother in her chest, and her mother's voice in her ear. We are going to go into that room, and we are going to let them raise every single objection they've got. The marital property claim the Halloran notice, all of it. And I am going to take it apart piece by piece in front of Julian Thorne, exactly the way he wants me to. And then when they think they've won, when they think the deal is dead, I am going to do the one thing none of them are expecting. What? Priya breathed. What are you going to do? Serena looked up at the tower, 40 floors of glass catching the afternoon light, and she smiled. I'm going to reveal that I already knew, she said. All of it. The Halloran plan, Vanessa's assignment, Mark's role. I've known for weeks, Priya. Why do you think I didn't fight the divorce this morning? Why do you think I let Mark hand me those papers and walk out feeling like a king? Because a divorce filed by Mark before the deal closes is worth nothing if I can prove the company is separate property, which I can. But a divorce filed by Mark that I fought and delayed would have kept us married through the closing and made everything messier. So I let him file. I wanted him to file. I have been steering this every bit as carefully as Vanessa Reyes has been steering my husband, except she doesn't know she's been steered right back. Halloran thinks they're about to tank my deal and buy the wreckage. What they don't know is that I've spent the last 3 weeks quietly documenting every move they've made, and I've turned it all over to Chimera's litigation counsel this morning, which is why they're here, Priya. They're not here because they're scared of my deal. They're here because I gave them a case against Halloran for tortious interference and corporate espionage and a coordinated scheme to depress the value of my company through the manipulation of my personal life. Priya made a sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. You turned it over to them this morning, before graduation. At 6 a.m., Serena said. Right after Mark served me the papers. I sat down at the kitchen table and he thought I was reading the divorce filing, and I was actually forwarding 8 months of documentation to Rebecca and to Chimera's legal team. He tore up my invitation while I was destroying the people who sent his girlfriend after him. He just didn't know it. She started walking toward the doors. Rebecca, is the litigation package solid? It's airtight, Rebecca said. Serena, when did you even find out about Vanessa and Halloran? How long have you known? And Serena stopped one hand on the door of the tower, and she said the thing that would, when this story finally broke, become the line that everyone remembered, the line that turned her from a victim into a legend. I found out, she said, on the same day Mark thought he'd found the perfect woman. Because the day he came home glowing about a brilliant new colleague at a Halloran event, I ran her name the way I run every name, and I saw where she worked, and I saw what her firm did, and I understood immediately what I was looking at. That was 8 months ago. And I made a decision right then, standing in the kitchen, while my husband told me about the amazing woman he'd met. I decided I would let it happen. All of it. The affair, the divorce, the sabotage. I would let them build their entire plan brick by brick, believing I was too blind and too small to see it. And then on the day they thought they'd won, I would pull one card out of the bottom, and the whole thing would come down on their heads. She pushed the door open. My mother taught me that too, Rebecca. She said when a snake comes into your house, you don't scream and chase it out. You leave the door open and you wait and you let it coil up somewhere warm and comfortable, and then when it's fast asleep and certain it's safe, you deal with it once cleanly and it never comes back. Mark has been coiled up warm and comfortable in my house for 8 months. Vanessa's been coiled up next to him. Halloran's been coiled up in the boardroom on the 40th floor, and they are all, every one of them, fast asleep and certain they're safe. She stepped into the lobby. The doors closed behind her. It's 2 o'clock, Serena said. Time to deal with the snakes. And 6 miles away, in a glass conference room where a completely different and far less important meeting was wrapping up Mark. Sterling finally felt his phone buzz in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting nothing, a spam text, a calendar reminder. Instead, he saw a news alert, the kind that a financial app pushes when something big happens in the market. He almost swiped it away. Then a single word in the headline caught his eye and made him stop and made his stomach turn slowly to ice. The word was biolance. He didn't know what biolance was. He'd never heard the name in his life. But he tapped the alert because something in his gut, some animal instinct older than thought, told him he needed to read it. And the article loaded, and he began to read, and the color drained out of his face, one word at a time. Breaking. Biotech firm BioAnt's therapeutics developer of a breakthrough rare disease platform is reportedly in final stage acquisition talks valued at approximately $850 million with Chimera Global, led by legendary investor Julian Thorne. The company was founded and is led by Dr. Serena Vance. Mark read the name 3 times. Serena Vance. Serena Vance. Serena Vance. His wife. The burden, the struggling grad student, the woman he had called nothing that very morning 6 hours ago in their kitchen before he tore up her graduation invitation and told her she'd be nothing after him too. Mark. A colleague was looking at him from across the conference table. Hey, you okay, man? You look like you've seen a ghost. Mark did not answer. His hand had started to shake, the same hand that had held the divorce papers so steadily that morning. He scrolled down, praying it was a different Serena Vance, a coincidence, a stranger with the same name. And then he saw the photograph. His wife, in a plain dark suit, walking into a glass tower with a doctoral hood folded over her arm. And the last line of the article, the line that finished the job, the headline had started the line that would echo in Mark Sterling's mind every day for the rest of his life. Sources close to the deal say Dr. Vance built the company in secret over the last several years, while completing her doctorate, keeping the venture entirely separate from her personal life. The acquisition is expected to close within hours. Within hours. Mark stood up so fast his chair fell over. Every head in the conference room turned, and he stood there in his expensive suit and the tie his wife had bought him, holding his phone in a hand that would not stop shaking. And he understood all at once with a completeness that would never leave him exactly what he had done that morning, and exactly what he had thrown away, and exactly how wrong he had been about everything about her, about himself, about the shape of his entire life. His phone buzzed again. A text this time, from Vanessa. He looked at it with a dawning horror because some part of him already knew, some part of him had already begun to assemble the pieces the way Serena had assembled them hours before. The text said, "We need to talk. Something's happening with a deal at work. Don't call the office. Don't call me. I'll explain later." And Mark Sterling, standing in the wreckage of the morning he had thought was his triumph, finally began to understand that he had never been the one in control. Not of his marriage, not of his affair, not of a single moment of the day that had just quietly and completely destroyed him. 6 miles away on the 40th floor, the elevator doors opened and Serena Vance stepped out. The elevator doors opened and Serena Vance stepped out onto the 40th floor, and the first thing she saw was Priya waiting for her by the glass wall. And the second thing she saw, past Priya through the wide windows of the conference room, was 14 people already seated around a long table. And at the head of that table, alone, unhurried, watching the door sat a man she recognized instantly, even though she had never met him in person. Julian Thorne did not stand when she entered, but he watched her cross the floor with an attention so complete that she felt it like heat, and when she reached the glass he gave her a single small nod, and in that nod was everything he had told her on the phone. "Fight, don't fold, I'm watching." Priya intercepted her before she reached the door. "They're ready," Priya whispered. "But Serena, something changed in the last 10 minutes. There's someone in there who wasn't on the list." Serena's pulse ticked upward. "Who?" "I don't know her, but she came in with the Halloran contingent and she's sitting with their legal team, and the way she carries herself, she's not a lawyer. She's an executive. And Serena," Priya's voice dropped even lower, "she keeps looking at the door, like she's waiting for you." Serena turned her head slowly and looked through the glass past Thorne, past the rows of executives to the far end of the table, where a woman in an immaculate gray suit sat with her hands folded, calm poised, beautiful, and watching the door with the patient, hungry attention of a predator who believes it has already won. And Serena knew without being told exactly who she was. "That's Vanessa," Serena said quietly. Priya's head snapped around. "What? No! Why would she be here? She's the girlfriend. She's not the girlfriend," Serena said, and her voice was very calm and very cold. "She was never the girlfriend. The girlfriend was the cover. She's Halloran's lead on the acquisition. She's here to close it, to watch the Chimera deal die, and then step in and make the low offer while the wreckage is still warm." Serena's eyes did not leave the woman through the glass. "She came in person. She wants to see it happen. She wants to watch me lose." "That's insane. That's arrogant. Why would she risk showing her face?" "Because she doesn't think there's any risk," Serena said. "In her mind, she's already won. She spent 9 months turning my husband into a legal grenade. She's filed her SEC notice, she's got Chimera spooked, and now she's come to enjoy the show. She thinks I'm walking into this room as a victim. A blindsided wife who found out about her company's peril this morning and is going to fumble and panic in front of Julian Thorne." Serena finally turned back to Priya and she smiled, and it was not a warm smile. Let her think that. Let her keep thinking it right up until the moment it costs her everything. "Now, give me the folder." Priya handed her a thin leather portfolio. Serena did not open it. She simply held it, and she took one breath, and then she walked through the door into the conference room. The conversation inside stopped. 14 faces turned toward her. She felt the weight of their attention, the collective judgment of some of the most powerful people in American business, all of them assessing her in the first 2 seconds, the way powerful people always did, cataloging the plain suit, the worn handbag, the absence of an entourage, and arriving most of them at the same wrong conclusion they always arrived at. Small, unimportant, easy. Serena took the empty seat at the foot of the table, directly across the long expanse of polished wood from Julian Thorne. She set the portfolio down in front of her. She folded her hands on top of it, and she waited. It was Chimera's lead counsel who spoke first, a silver-haired man named David Ashford, who had the smooth, regretful voice of a man about to deliver bad news. He wanted you to know he took no pleasure in. "Dr. Vance," he said, "thank you for joining us. I'll be candid because I think you deserve candor. When we began due diligence on biotech, we expected a straightforward transaction. The science is exceptional. The intellectual property is well protected. The financials are clean. On paper, this is one of the most attractive acquisitions Chimera has evaluated in years." "But," Serena said. Ashford inclined his head, acknowledging it. "But this morning matters became complicated. We received notice of a potential ownership dispute. And I'll be direct with you, Dr. Vance, because everyone at this table already knows it. We've been made aware that you were served with divorce papers this morning, and it has been suggested to us by parties with an interest in this transaction that your company may be subject to a marital property claim, that your husband may be entitled to a portion of biotech, and Chimera cannot in good conscience close an $850 million acquisition when the ownership of the underlying assets is in question." A murmur went around the table, and at the far end, Vanessa Reyes leaned back very slightly in her chair, and the corner of her mouth curved so faint that no one who wasn't watching for it would have seen it. But Serena was watching for it. Serena saw the smile, and Serena filed it away. "I understand the concern," Serena said evenly. "May I ask which parties made you aware of this potential dispute?" Ashford hesitated. "I'm not at liberty to— Was it Halloran Capital?" The room went still. "Dr. Vance," Ashford began. "Because I notice," Serena continued in the same calm, unhurried voice, "that Halloran has sent quite a large contingent today for a firm that has no formal role in this transaction. 2 lawyers, a litigation specialist, and—" she looked down the table directly at Vanessa Reyes for the first time, "a vice president of acquisitions. That's a great deal of firepower to send to a meeting you're not part of. Unless, of course, you expect to become part of it very soon." Vanessa Reyes met her gaze without flinching. She was good. Serena had to give her that. There was not a flicker of surprise, not a trace of guilt, just cool professional assessment. "Dr. Vance," Vanessa said, and her voice was warm, almost kind, the voice of someone who had spent 9 months learning exactly how to sound trustworthy. "I understand this must be an incredibly difficult day for you, personally and professionally, and I want you to know that Halloran has tremendous respect for what you've built. That's precisely why we're here. If there is uncertainty around this transaction, if Chimera has concerns they can't resolve, we want you to know that you have options. Biotech is a remarkable company, and it deserves a home even if that home turns out not to be Chimera." It was masterful. In 4 sentences, she had positioned herself as Serena's ally, cast doubt on the Chimera deal, and offered herself as the safe alternative, all while sounding like the most caring person in the room. Serena understood listening to it exactly how Mark had fallen. This woman could make you believe anything. "That's very generous," Serena said. "Can I ask your name? I don't believe we've been introduced." The smallest pause. "Vanessa Reyes, Vice President of Acquisitions at Halloran Capital." "Vanessa Reyes," Serena repeated, as if committing it to memory, though of course she had known it for 8 months. "Well, Ms. Reyes, I appreciate the offer, but I think before we discuss my options, we should resolve the concern that's actually on the table, the question of whether my company is subject to a marital property claim." She turned back to Ashford. "Because that's the real issue, isn't it? Not whether the science works, not whether the numbers hold, whether my soon-to-be ex-husband can freeze this deal by claiming he owns part of Biovance. That is the issue, Ashford admitted. Then let me resolve it, Serena said, and she opened the portfolio. For the next 90 seconds, the room was silent, except for Serena's voice, which never rose, never rushed, never wavered as she laid out document by document the complete legal architecture of a company that could not be touched. She explained the three sources of Biovance's funding: her inheritance, separate property; her brother's memorial fund established before the marriage, separate property; the outside seed round corporate capital, not marital. She explained that not $1 of marital funds had ever entered the company, that she had never permitted her husband to invest, that she had never commingled a single account. Dr. Vance, Ashford interrupted gently, I don't doubt the funding was separate, but you're aware that under New York law, the appreciation of separate property during a marriage can generate a marital claim if that appreciation is due to the active efforts of either spouse. Your company was worth almost nothing 8 years ago. It's worth $850 million today. Your husband's attorneys will certainly argue that he supported you during the years you built it, that his support enabled your work, and that he is therefore entitled to a share of that appreciation. And that argument, even if it ultimately fails, could tie this deal up in litigation for years. And here it was, the heart of the attack. The one legal thread that could, if pulled correctly, unravel everything. Serena saw Vanessa Reyes lean forward almost imperceptibly, and she understood that this was the moment Vanessa had engineered the trap. She had spent 9 months building the reason Mark's divorce had been timed exactly the way it was. Because if Mark could credibly claim he supported Serena, if he could stand up in court and swear he'd carried her for 8 years, then the appreciation argument had teeth and the deal was dead, and Halloran would win. Serena let the silence stretch for a moment, and then she reached into the portfolio and pulled out a second, thicker folder, and she set it on the table. I anticipated this argument, she said. In fact, I anticipated it 8 years ago. She slid the folder toward the center of the table. This is a complete record of every household expense during my marriage. Rent, utilities, groceries, insurance, every dollar spent on our shared life month by month for 8 years, with the corresponding bank records showing the source of every payment. She paused. You'll notice something interesting. My husband believes he supported me during our marriage. He said so this morning. He told me I was a burden he'd carried for 8 years, and in the divorce filing his attorney served me at 7 a.m. There is a sworn statement to that effect, that he was the primary financial support of the household, that his income sustained our life while I pursued my education. She looked around the table, and her voice was very quiet now, very precise. These records prove that statement is false. Every single major household expense that my husband believes he paid, I actually reimbursed in full from my own separate accounts through a series of transfers structured so that he never noticed. He would pay the rent from our joint account, and within days I would replace those funds from my own account. He thought he was supporting me. In reality, I was funding my own life and letting him believe otherwise for 8 years. Oh, she let that land. So when his attorneys argue that his support enabled my work, I will produce these records. And I will demonstrate to the penny that Mark Sterling never provided $1 of net support to me or to my company. His claim of support isn't just weak. It's perjury, and the moment he swears to it under oath, I will prove it, and his entire claim collapses. The room had gone absolutely silent. David Ashford was staring at the folder. Even the Halloran lawyers had stopped moving. And at the far end of the table, Vanessa Reyes's composed expression had developed for the first time a hairline crack. Because this was not the reaction of a blindsided victim. This was a woman who had prepared for this exact attack years before it came. Why? Ashford said slowly. Would you keep such detailed records? For 8 years. What made you think you'd ever need them? And Serena told them the truth, because the truth at this point was the most powerful weapon she had. My mother told me to, she said. She said a woman should always be able to prove that what she built alone, so that no man could ever stand on it and call it his. I kept the records because my mother buried a husband who left her with nothing, and she raised a daughter who would never be left with nothing. I didn't know I'd need them, but I knew that someday someone might try to take from me what I made, and I wanted to be ready. She closed the folder. I've been getting ready my whole life, Mr. Ashford. This morning was just the day it finally paid off. Julian Thorne at the head of the table had not said a word this entire time, but now, very slightly, he smiled. Ashford recovered his professional composure. Dr. Vance, this is compelling, genuinely, but I have to be honest with you. Even if the marital claim is as weak as you say, the existence of the dispute itself creates uncertainty. And Halloran has filed a formal notice of interest with the SEC, which signals a potential competing bid. Between the divorce and the notice, Chimera's board is going to want assurances we simply may not be able to provide today. This deal was scheduled to close this afternoon, but I don't see how we can close under a cloud like this. And there it was, the moment Vanessa Reyes had been waiting for. The deal teetering, Chimera spooked, the path clearing for Halloran to swoop in. Vanessa spoke, and her voice was smooth as glass. David, if I may, I think what Dr. Vance has shown us today is admirable, but it also confirms exactly why Chimera should be cautious. A founder in the middle of a contentious divorce, a company facing potential litigation, a deal that might drag through the courts for years. Chimera's board has a fiduciary duty to its shareholders. Closing today would be reckless. She turned to Serena, and her expression was pure sympathy. Dr. Vance, I really do think you'd be better served by taking some time. Let the divorce settle. Let the dust clear. And when you're ready, Halloran would be honored to discuss a transaction that gives you the stability you deserve. It was a beautiful move. She had just, in the guise of caring for Serena, told Chimera to walk away, and told Serena to wait, knowing that a delayed deal was a dead deal, knowing that a company in legal limbo would lose value by the week, knowing that when the smoke cleared, Halloran would be there to buy the wreckage for a fraction of the price. And Serena Vance looked down the table at the woman who had spent 9 months seducing her husband and turning him into a weapon, and she felt the last piece of her plan click into place. Ms. Reyes, Serena said, you keep saying you want to give me stability, options, time, and I keep noticing that every option you offer happens to end with Halloran owning my company. She tilted her head. Can I ask you a personal question? Vanessa's smile stayed in place, but her eyes sharpened. Of course. How long have you known my husband? The room went very still. I'm sorry, Vanessa said. My husband, Mark Sterling. How long have you known him? I'm not sure I understand the relevance, Vanessa said, and for the first time there was the faintest strain in her voice. Humor me, Serena said. It's a simple question. You work in biotech acquisitions. My husband works in finance. It's a big city but a small world at the top. I'm just curious whether your paths have ever crossed. I don't believe I've had the pleasure, Vanessa said, and Serena opened the portfolio one more time. That's interesting, she said, because I have here a series of photographs time-stamped and location-tagged of you and my husband together at 11 different social and professional events over the past 9 months. I have restaurant reservations under your name for 2. I have a hotel folio from a weekend in the Hamptons 4 months ago, and I have, she pulled out a single sheet of paper, an internal Halloran Capital deal memo dated 10 months ago, in which your firm identified BioAnce Therapeutics as an acquisition target. Identified my marriage as a, and I'm quoting directly, potentially exploitable founder situation, and flagged the spousal relationship for monitoring. 1 month after that memo was written, Ms. Reyes, you began a relationship with my husband. The silence in the room was total. It was the silence of 14 powerful people watching something happen that none of them had anticipated, the silence of a trap being sprung. Vanessa Reyes had gone very pale. Those documents are fabricated. That's slander. You can't. They're not fabricated, Serena said calmly. And they're not slander, because slander requires falsehood, and every word of this is true. But I understand why you'd want to say that. Because what these documents show, Ms. Reyes, is that Halloran Capital did not identify BioAnce as a target because of its science. Halloran identified my company as a target, and then deployed you a vice president of acquisitions to seduce my husband, cultivate his dissatisfaction with our marriage, and time his divorce filing to create a marital property dispute that would spook any legitimate acquirer so that Halloran could tank the deal and buy my company at a distressed valuation. That's not an acquisition strategy, Ms. Reyes. That's tortious interference. It's fraud. And depending on how a court views the use of a personal relationship to manipulate the value of a public transaction, it may well be criminal. She turned to David Ashford, and she slid the entire portfolio across the table to him. Mr. Ashford, this morning at 6 a.m. before I attended my own graduation, I forwarded this complete documentation package to Chimera's litigation counsel. I believe that's why Mr. Reyes' colleagues in your legal department joined this meeting, not because they're worried about my company, because I gave them a case against Halloran for a coordinated scheme to depress the value of BioVance through the manipulation of my personal life. She paused. The cloud over this deal, Mr. Ashford, was never my divorce. My divorce is clean, my company is separate property, and I've proven it. The cloud was Halloran, and I've just handed you the sun. Julian Thorne began very slowly to laugh. It was a low, delighted, genuinely astonished laugh, and it rolled down the length of the table and broke over the assembled executives like a wave. And it was everyone in that room understood the sound of a legendary investor watching a founder do exactly what he had come early to see her do. Ms. Reyes, Thorne said, wiping his eyes, still chuckling. I think you should go. I think your entire firm should go. And I think you should call your general counsel on the way down, because from what Dr. Vance just described, your firm is going to need him. He looked at the Halloran contingent, all of whom had gone the color of paper. You came here to watch a company die. Instead, you got to watch a founder feed you your own strategy. It's the most entertaining thing I've seen in a boardroom in 20 years, and I've been in a lot of boardrooms. He gestured at the door. Out, all of you, now. For a moment, no one moved. And then Vanessa Reyes stood slowly, her professional mask finally completely gone, replaced by something raw and furious and afraid. She looked down the table at Serena, and when she spoke, her voice was low and shaking. You knew, she said. You've known this whole time. For 8 months, Serena said, since the day my husband came home glowing about a brilliant new woman he'd met at a Halloran event. I ran your name that night, Ms. Reyes. I saw where you worked. I understood what I was looking at within about 10 minutes. She held Vanessa's gaze steadily. You spent 9 months building a plan. I spent 9 months documenting it. You thought you were the predator, but you built your entire strategy on the assumption that I was too small and too blind to see it. That's the mistake everyone makes with me. My husband made it this morning when he called me a burden. You made it 10 months ago when you flagged my marriage as exploitable. And it's the same mistake, Ms. Reyes. You looked at a quiet woman, and you saw prey. You should have looked closer. Vanessa Reyes stood frozen for one more second. Then she gathered her things, and she walked out, and the Halloran contingent followed her, and the door closed behind them, and the 40th floor was suddenly very quiet. David Ashford looked down at the portfolio in front of him. He turned a few of the pages. He looked up at Serena, and there was something new in his face now, something that had not been there when she walked in. Respect. Not the professional courtesy he'd extended at the start. Real respect, the kind that costs something to give. Dr. Vance, he said quietly, you didn't come here today to defend your company. No, Serena said. You came here to eliminate the people trying to steal it. I came here to close a deal, Serena said. The people trying to steal it just happened to be in the room. I would have preferred to handle them privately. But they came in person to watch me lose, so I let them stay for the ending. Ashford almost smiled. He closed the portfolio. I need to consult with my board, and with our litigation team, who I suspect are going to be very busy this afternoon. But I'll be honest with you, Dr. Vance. 10 minutes ago, I thought this deal was dead. Now, he tapped the folder. Now I think we may be looking at the cleanest, most defensible acquisition I've seen in a decade, run by the most formidable founder I've ever sat across from. Give me 30 minutes. He stood, and most of the table stood with him, and they filed out to make their calls. And then the conference room held only two people, Serena Vance at one end, Julian Thorne at the other. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Thorne leaned back in his chair, and he studied her, and he said, "You want to know the moment I decided to buy your company? When you read the science—" "No, the science I decided to buy months ago. That's just money. Anyone with a checkbook can buy good science." He folded his hands. "I decided to buy your company about 90 seconds ago, when you had that woman dead to rights, when you'd already won, when you could have destroyed her completely in front of 14 witnesses. And you didn't. You gave her a chance to walk out with her dignity mostly intact. You said you should have looked closer. You didn't say you're finished. You're ruined. I'm going to bury you. You beat her, and then you let her walk. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know how many people I've watched in this exact room win and then keep swinging out of pure spite until they've destroyed something they didn't need to destroy?" He shook his head. "Most people build companies to win, but the winners who last, the ones who build things that outlive them, they're not building to win. They're building to finish something. You're not trying to beat anyone, Dr. Vance. You're trying to finish something you started when you were 9 years old at a bedside watching your brother die. Everything else, the husband, the girlfriend, the corporate schemers, they're just noise. You've been walking straight through the noise your entire life toward one thing." He leaned forward. "Tell me his name again." Serena's throat tightened. "Danny." "Danny," Thorne repeated softly. "Well, when this deal closes, and it's going to close, Dr. Vance Danny's disease is going to have a treatment. And a lot of other Dannys and a lot of other families are going to grow up instead of dying at 9, because a little girl made a promise at a bedside and then spent 25 years keeping it in the dark while the whole world told her she was nothing." He stood. "I'll be honest with you. I don't usually get emotional about deals. But I think I need a minute, and I think you might too." He walked to the window and looked out over the city, and he gave her his back gently, deliberately, so that she could have the moment he'd seen coming, the moment she'd been holding off all day, the moment that finally, quietly arrived. And Serena Vance alone at the end of a boardroom table on the 40th floor, with the deal all but won, and her enemies routed, and her husband's world collapsing 6 miles away, put her face in her hands and wept. Not for Mark, not for the marriage, or the betrayal, or the humiliation of the morning. She wept for the boy, for Danny, for the promise, for the 9-year-old girl who had sat by a bed and sworn that no other family would have to watch what her family watched if she could help it. She wept because after 25 years, she could finally help it. And Julian Thorne stood at the window with his back to her, watching the city, giving her the only gift he could give a woman who had just given the world so much: privacy, silence, time. The clock on the wall read 2:41. Downstairs, David Ashford was on the phone with Chimera's board. Across the city, Mark Sterling was standing in a fallen chair reading a news alert for the 10th time. And in a conference room 40 floors above Manhattan, a woman who had been called nothing that very morning cried quietly for a brother who had been gone for 25 years. And then after a few minutes, she wiped her face and she straightened her jacket and she sat up, because she had a deal to close and a promise to keep, and she had never in her life been the kind of woman who stayed down for long. She had never in her life been the kind of woman who stayed down for long. And so when the door of the conference room opened at 3:14 and David Ashford walked back in, Serena Vance was sitting exactly as she had been when he left, composed upright, her hands folded on the table, showing no trace of the tears that had come and gone in the intervening half-hour. Julian Thorne had returned to his seat at the head of the table. Priya had slipped in and taken a chair against the wall. And the rest of the Chimera team filed in behind Ashford, and Serena read their faces the way she read everything quickly and completely, and she knew before Ashford said a word that something had changed. "Dr. Vance," Ashford began, and then he stopped and he set down the folder he was carrying, and he did something Serena had not expected. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, the gesture of a man setting down a role he'd been performing. "I've been practicing acquisitions law for 31 years, he said. "I've closed deals worth billions. I've sat across from some of the sharpest people in this country. And in 31 years, I have never once walked out of a room to call my board and said what I said to them 20 minutes ago." He put his glasses back on. I told them that the founder had turned a hostile ambush into a litigation asset before lunch, and that if we didn't close this deal today, we'd be handing the single best acquisition target of the decade to a firm that had just been exposed as fraudulent, and that I would personally resign before I let that happen. He almost smiled. The board approved, unanimously, in 4 minutes. That's also a record. Serena felt something loosen in her chest, but she kept her face still because it wasn't done yet, and she had learned a long time ago never to celebrate until the ink was dry. "So we're closing," she said. "We're closing," Ashford confirmed, "but there are terms to finalize, and I want to walk through them with you personally because—" He glanced at Thorne. "Because Mr. Thorne made some additions to the standard structure that I've never seen him make before, and I want to make sure you understand exactly what you're agreeing to." Serena turned to Thorne. "What additions?" And Julian Thorne, who had been silent through Ashford's entire speech, leaned forward, and there was something in his expression that had not been there in any of their earlier exchanges, a kind of resolve. "When Chimera acquires a company," Thorne said, "the standard structure is simple. We buy the equity, we take control. The founder gets a payout and usually an earn-out contract that keeps them around for 2 or 3 years, and then most of them leave, and we run the company the way we want to run it. That's the model. It's made me a great deal of money." He tapped the table. "I don't want to do that with biotech." Serena went very still. Here it was. The catch. There was always a catch. She had known in the back of her mind that the day would come when someone with more money than her would try to take the thing she'd built and turn it into something she didn't recognize. Strip it for parts. Chase the profitable diseases and abandon the rare ones, do exactly the thing she had built the whole company to prevent. "Mr. Thorne," she said carefully, "biotech exists to treat rare diseases, orphan conditions, the ones nobody funds because there aren't enough patients to make them profitable. If Chimera acquires this company and then pivots it toward more commercially attractive targets, then I need you to know right now before anything is signed that I will not be part of that. I don't care what the number is. I did not spend 25 years keeping a promise to my brother so that I could hand his disease to a company that would shelve the cure because it wasn't profitable enough." The room was silent, and Julian Thorne, to everyone's surprise, smiled a slow, genuine smile, and he nodded as if she had just confirmed something he'd been hoping for. "That," he said, "is exactly why I made the additions." He gestured to Ashford. "Tell her." Ashford opened the folder. "The structure Mr. Thorne insisted on is unusual. Chimera acquires biotech for $850 million as agreed. But instead of the standard equity purchase with a founder earnout, this deal is structured so that you, Dr. Vance, retain a controlling interest in the company's scientific direction in perpetuity. Chimera provides the capital, the infrastructure, the global distribution, and the regulatory muscle. But the rare disease mission is written into the acquisition agreement as a binding covenant. Chimera cannot redirect the platform toward commercial targets without your consent. Not in 5 years. Not in 50. The mission is legally protected, permanently." Serena stared at him. "That's not possible. Boards change. CEOs change. You can't bind a company to a mission forever. Any future leadership could—" "They can't," Thorne interrupted, "because I structured it as a poison pill. If any future leadership of Chimera attempts to redirect biotech away from rare disease research, the entire platform, the IP, the patents, all of it reverts to a foundation controlled by you. It's called the Daniel Vance Foundation. I took the liberty of drafting the charter this afternoon while you were having your moment by the window. I hope you don't mind that I named it. It seemed right." Serena could not speak. She looked at the name on the document Ashford slid toward her. The Daniel Vance Foundation. Her brother's name, Danny's name. On a foundation that would exist for as long as the company existed, that would guarantee in ink in law and perpetuity that no board and no CEO and no shareholder pressure would ever be able to abandon the children, like Danny, the ones the world had always been willing to let die because there weren't enough of them to matter. "Why?" she managed finally. "Why would you do this? This isn't good business, Mr. Thorne. You've just spent $850 million to buy a company you can never fully control. You've handed the founder a permanent veto and a poison pill that could rip the whole platform out of your hands. No investor does this. Why?" And Julian Thorne was quiet for a moment. And then he told her something he had not told anyone in a very long time. "I had a sister," he said. "Younger than me. When I was a boy, before any of this, before the money, before the name, my sister got sick. A rare thing. The kind of thing that didn't have a name yet, that the doctors couldn't treat, that they told my parents to take her home and make her comfortable because there was nothing else to do." He looked out the window. "She was 6. I was 10. And I sat by her bed the way you sat by your brother's, and I made the same promise you made. Except I didn't keep mine, Dr. Vance. I grew up and I got rich and I bought companies and I made money, and every year I told myself that someday I'd do something about the thing that killed my sister, and every year I found a reason to wait. And then this morning my analysts put a file in front of me about a company built by a woman who did what I never had the courage to do. Who kept the promise. Who spent 25 years in the dark, keeping the promise, while her own husband told people she was nothing." He turned back to her. "You want to know why I'm doing this? Because I'm 68 years old, and I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, and I have spent my entire career buying things and selling them and building nothing that will outlast me. And now at the end, a woman half my age walks into my boardroom having built the exact thing I promised my dying sister I would build, and never did. So no, Dr. Vance. This isn't good business. It's the best thing I've ever done with my money, and it's the closest I'll ever come to keeping a promise I broke 58 years ago. Let me have this, please." Amo Gitite. The room was completely silent. Priya against the wall had put a hand over her mouth. Even Ashford was looking at the table, blinking hard. And Serena Vance understood finally why Julian Thorne had come early, why he had read her brother's file, why he had followed her all morning, why he never stood up in meetings but had told her he would today. It was never about the science or the money or even about her. It was about a 6-year-old girl named Serena, would later learn Eleanor, who had died 58 years ago, in a bed with her 10-year-old brother sitting beside her, holding a promise he would carry unkept for the rest of his life, until the afternoon a stranger walked into his boardroom and gave him a way to finally lay it down. "His name was Daniel," Serena said quietly, "but everyone called him Danny." "I know," Thorne said. "That's why the foundation is the Daniel Vance Foundation and not the Danny Vance Foundation. Because foundations should carry the name a person would have grown into. Danny was a little boy. Daniel is who he would have become. A man, maybe a scientist, maybe a father, somebody with a whole life. That's who we're building for, not the child who died, the man who never got to live." He paused. "I learned that the hard way. My foundation, the one I set up years ago and never really used, it's called the Eleanor Thorne Foundation. Not Ellie, Eleanor, because I've spent 58 years imagining the woman my sister would have become, and I named it for her." He cleared his throat and his voice was rough. "Now, are you going to sign Dr. Vance, or are you going to make an old man beg?" Serena picked up the pen, but she did not sign yet, because there was one more thing she needed to say, one more thing that had been building in her all day, and she looked at Julian Thorne and she said it. "I'll sign, but I want to add one condition of my own, and it's not negotiable." Thorne's eyebrows rose. "Go on." "The Daniel Vance Foundation," Serena said. "I want it merged with the Eleanor Thorne Foundation. I want it to carry both their names, because you're right that I've been building for a boy who never got to grow up. But I've been building alone in the dark for 25 years, and I'm tired of building alone. And you've been carrying a promise alone for 58 years, and I think you're tired too. So let's stop carrying them alone. The Daniel and Eleanor Foundation. 2 children who died before anyone could save them, and 2 people who spent their whole lives trying to make sure it never happened to anyone else again. That's the condition. Take it or leave it." For a moment, Julian Thorne did not move. And then this man, this legend, this titan of American finance who never stood up in meetings, stood up. He stood up slowly, and he walked the entire length of the conference table, past 14 astonished executives, and he stopped in front of Serena Vance, and he held out his hand. "Dr. Vance," he said, and his voice was not entirely steady. "In 58 years, I have never once been outmaneuvered in my own boardroom. You've done it twice in one afternoon. Once with the Halloran woman and once just now with me. He took her hand. "The Daniel and Eleanor Foundation. It's the best deal I ever made. Sign the papers." And Serena Vance signed the papers. The pen moved across the signature line at 3:52 in the afternoon, and when she lifted it, 8 years of building in the dark, 25 years of a promise, and one single morning that had begun with divorce papers and a torn invitation, all resolved into a single fact that could never again be undone. BioAnts Therapeutics belonged to Chimera Global. Serena Vance retained control of its mission in perpetuity, and a foundation now existed in ink and in law that would carry the names of 2 dead children into a future they would never see, but would, through the work she had built, help create. The room, which had been silent, broke into applause, real applause. The Chimera executives who had walked into the room that morning expecting a routine acquisition, and had instead witnessed something none of them would ever forget, stood and applauded, and Priya crossed the room and threw her arms around Serena. And for a moment, the composure that Serena had held all day through the divorce papers, and the graduation and the boardroom war, and the tears by the window finally fully broke, and she held her oldest friend and her co-founder, and she laughed and cried at the same time. "We did it," Priya whispered. "Serena, we did it. 8 years. We actually did it." "You did it," Serena said. "You and every person who ever believed in this when there was no reason to believe. I just held the pen." Julian Thorne clapped Ashford on the shoulder. "David, get the press release out. And I wanted to say exactly one thing about the founder. I wanted to say that Dr. Serena Vance built this company in secret over 8 years while completing her doctorate, and that the acquisition closed on the same day she received her degree. That's it. Let the rest of the world figure out the story from there." "Mr. Thorne," Ashford said, "if we release it that way, the press is going to dig. And within about 6 hours, they're going to find the divorce filing. They're going to find that she was served this morning. And once they find that, Thorne said, it becomes the biggest business story of the year. A woman served divorce papers on the morning she closed an $850 million deal her husband didn't know existed." He smiled, but there was steel in it. "Let them find it. I didn't create that story. Her husband did. He's the one who chose this morning to tell a billionaire founder she was nothing. If he ends up as the punchline in every business publication in the country, that's not our doing. That's just the natural consequence of a man mistaking silence for weakness." He looked at Serena. "Unless you prefer we keep it quiet. It's your life, Dr. Vance, your call. If you want the divorce kept out of it, I'll make sure it stays out of it. I have that kind of reach." And Serena thought about it. She thought about it genuinely the way she thought about everything, weighing it, examining it from every side. She could keep it quiet. She could let the story be about the science, the deal, the mission, and let Mark Sterling slink away into obscurity without ever having to face publicly what he'd done. It would be the gracious thing, the dignified thing, the thing her mother might have told her to do. But then she thought about something else her mother had told her. Not the thing about building in the dark or holding on with both hands or waiting for the snake to fall asleep. A different thing. Something her mother had said near the very end in the hospital when she was dying, when she'd taken Serena's hand and said, "Mija, promise me you won't spend your life being small so that small men can feel large. Promise me that when you finally turn on the lights, you'll turn them all the way on." "Don't keep it quiet," Serena said. Thorne raised an eyebrow. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. But I don't want the story to be about Mark. I don't want his name in it at all, actually. I don't want him to be the villain, because making him the villain would give him a role, and he doesn't deserve a role in my story. He was never important enough to be the villain." She looked at Thorne. "I want the story to be about a woman who built something in silence for 8 years while the world told her she was nothing, and then, on a single day, turned on the lights. That's the story. If the press finds the divorce, they find it. If they figure out who my husband was, they figure it out. But I'm not going to hand him to them. I'm not going to make him famous for humiliating me. The best revenge isn't destroying him. The best revenge is that he becomes a footnote in the story of my success. Not the villain, not even a character, just a small, sad man who was married to someone extraordinary and never once bothered to find out." Julian Thorne looked at her for a long moment, and then he said softly, "Your mother must have been an extraordinary woman." "She was," Serena said. "She really was. I'd have liked to meet her." "She'd have liked you," Serena said. She had a soft spot for old men who finally learned to keep their promises. Thorne laughed, and it broke the last of the tension in the room, and the executives began to gather their things, and the afternoon that had held a war and a triumph and two ghosts and a promise finally began to wind toward its close. It was 4:18 when Serena's phone rang. She almost didn't look at it, but something made her glance down, and when she saw the name on the screen, she went very still, because it was Mark. Priya saw her face change. "Who is it?" "Mark," Serena said quietly. The room went silent. Everyone understood without being told what that meant. He had seen the news, he had done the math, and now 6 hours after telling his wife she was nothing, he was calling her, and everyone in that room knew exactly why. "Don't answer it," Priya said immediately. "Serena, don't. There's nothing he can say. There's nothing you need to hear. Let it go to voicemail. Let your lawyers deal with him. Don't give him one more second of your life." And it was good advice. It was the right advice. Serena knew it was the right advice, but she also knew something Priya didn't, something that had been sitting in the back of her mind all day, a small unfinished piece, a loose thread, and she understood that she was not going to be able to fully close this chapter of her life until she'd pulled it. She answered the phone. "Hello, Mark," she said. There was a silence on the line. And then Mark Sterling's voice, and it was not the voice from that morning, not the cold, contemptuous, bored voice that had called her a burden. It was small. It was shaking. It was the voice of a man standing in the ruins of a life he had blown up himself and only just now understood. "Serena," he said. "Serena, oh my God. Is it true? The news? The deal is, is it real? 850 million. You. Is it you?" "It's real," Serena said calmly. "And it's me." "I didn't—" His voice cracked. "Serena, I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. You never told me. You never said anything. You let me think all these years. You let me think you were just that you were—" "That I was a burden," Serena said. "That I was nothing. That I was a weight around your neck you'd carried for 8 years. She kept her voice perfectly level. "Those were your words this morning, Mark. 6 hours ago. In our kitchen. Right before you tore up my graduation invitation. Do you remember?" Silence. "I remember," he whispered. "I want you to keep remembering it," Serena said. "For the rest of your life, I want you to remember exactly what you believed about me this morning, and exactly what you said, and exactly how certain you were. Because you were so certain, Mark. That was always the thing about you. You were never right, but you were always certain. And you built your entire understanding of me, of us, of your own life, on being certain about a woman you never once bothered to actually look at." "Serena, please. I know how this looks. I know what I did. But we were together for 8 years. 8 years, Serena. That has to count for something. Whatever's happening now, whatever this deal is, we built a life together, and I—" His voice took on a wheedling, desperate edge that made her almost pity him. "I supported you. All those years. I paid for everything. I gave you the stability to do your work. Without me, you couldn't have—" And Serena closed her eyes because she had known this was coming, had known it from the moment she'd seen his name on the screen, and it was almost sad how predictable he was, how completely he'd walked into it. "Mark," she said gently, "stop talking, because you're about to say something under oath that you already put in your divorce filing, and I need you to understand something before you dig the hole any deeper." She opened her eyes. "I have 8 years of financial records. Every rent payment you ever made from our joint account I replaced from my own within days. Every expense you thought you were covering, I covered. You never supported me, Mark, not with $1 of net contribution. I supported myself, and I let you believe otherwise because a man who thinks he's carrying you doesn't look too closely at what you're actually building. Your vanity was my camouflage for 8 years, and now it's going to be the thing that guts your claim to my company." She let that sink in. "So please, keep telling people you supported me. Say it under oath. Say it to your lawyer. Say it to the press. Because every time you say it, I'll produce the records that prove it's a lie, and you'll look like exactly what you are." A man who took credit for a fortune he never earned, built by a woman he never respected, and then tore up her graduation invitation on the morning it all paid off. The silence on the line was total, and then Serena heard something she had not expected. She heard Mark Sterling begin to cry. "I'm sorry," he said, and it came out broken, gasping. "Serena, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was so wrong about everything. Please, I don't know what I'm going to do. Vanessa won't answer my calls. My lawyer says the divorce filing might be a problem. Everything's falling apart. And I keep thinking about this morning about what I said to you, and I can't take it back, and I would give anything to take it back. Please, Serena, please. Is there any way at all?" And Serena Vance stood in a boardroom on the 40th floor, having just become one of the most powerful women in American biotech, listening to her husband weep and beg, and she felt to her own surprise no triumph at all. She felt only a vast, quiet sadness, and underneath it, a strange and gentle release, the feeling of finally setting down something she'd been carrying for far too long. "Mark," she said softly, "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to actually hear it, because it's the last thing I'm ever going to say to you." She took a breath. "This morning when you handed me those papers, I felt calm, and I didn't understand why until just now. I thought it was because of the deal, because I knew what was coming and you didn't, but that wasn't it." She paused. "The reason I was calm, Mark, is that the moment you stopped believing in me, I stopped needing you. And I realized, standing in that kitchen, that I'd actually stopped needing you a long time ago, years ago. I just hadn't let myself notice, because noticing would have meant admitting that my marriage had been over for a long, long time, and I wasn't ready to admit that yet. You did me a favor this morning. You made me admit it. You set me free." "Serena, I forgive you," she said, and she meant it. "Not because you deserve it, you don't, but because carrying it would cost me energy, and I have better things to spend my energy on now. So I forgive you, and I'm hanging up, and after today, you and I are never going to speak again. My lawyers will handle the divorce. You have no claim to my company, and if you try to make one, you'll lose, and it'll cost you money you don't have. Take the clean divorce. Walk away. Rebuild your life. And Mark," she paused one final time, "someday, years from now, you're going to meet someone, and they're going to ask you about your past, and you're going to have to decide whether to tell them the truth. About the wife you had, and what she built, and what you said to her the morning it all came true. I hope you tell them the truth. I think it might be the only way you ever become someone worth being." And Serena Vance hung up the phone. The room was silent. Priya was staring at her with tears in her eyes. Julian Thorne was watching her with an expression of profound, quiet respect. And Serena stood there for a moment, phone in hand, and then she slipped it into her worn handbag, the same handbag she'd carried all day, the one she'd never replaced, because every dollar had always gone into the company instead. "Well," she said, and her voice was steady again, and there was even the ghost of a smile in it. "That's done." She looked around the room at the faces of the people who had witnessed the strangest and most extraordinary day of all their careers. "Gentlemen, ladies, Priya, Mr. Thorne, thank you, all of you, for seeing what my husband never could." She picked up her doctoral hood from the table where it had sat folded all through the meeting. "I received a doctorate this morning, and I closed a deal this afternoon, and I ended a marriage this evening, and I think that's just about enough for one day." Julian Thorne laughed. "Dr. Vance, I think you've had enough for 1 decade. He walked her toward the door. "Go home. Rest. Tomorrow the whole world is going to know your name, and your life is going to become something very different from what it was. Enjoy tonight. It's the last quiet night you're going to have for a long time." And Serena Vance walked out of the boardroom past the glass walls into the elevator, and as the doors closed and the 40th floor fell away beneath her, she looked at her reflection in the polished steel. A woman in a plain dark suit holding a doctoral hood and a worn handbag, and she thought about the morning, about the torn invitation, about a man who had called her nothing. And she smiled because she knew finally and completely that she had never been nothing. She had always been everything. The world was just about to find out. The world found out at 6 o'clock the next morning. Serena woke in a hotel room she'd booked the night before because she could not bring herself to spend one more night in the apartment that had never really been hers, and she reached for her phone the way she always did out of 8 years of habit. And she found that it had at some point in the night simply stopped being able to hold all the messages. 240 voicemails, over 1,000 texts, emails she stopped trying to count, and when she opened a news app, her own face was looking back at her. The photograph from the day before, a woman in a plain dark suit walking into a glass tower, and above it a headline that would be repeated in one form or another across every major publication in the country by noon. The secret founder, the $850 million woman, the scientist who built an empire in silence. But it was the second wave of coverage, the wave that came a few hours later, that turned the story from a business headline into a phenomenon. Because just as David Ashford had predicted, the press had dug, and the press had found the divorce filing, and the press had done the math, and by 10 that morning the story was no longer about a biotech acquisition. It was about a woman who had been served divorce papers on the morning of the biggest day of her life by a husband who had no idea who she was. Serena had asked that Mark's name be kept out of it, and Thorne, true to his word, had made sure the official coverage never named him. But the internet was not the official coverage. The internet found things, and within a day, someone had connected the divorce filing to a mid-level finance executive named Mark Sterling, and someone else had found the transfer records that showed the second mortgage he'd secretly taken out on the apartment, and someone else had found a photograph of him at a Halloran Capital event standing next to a woman named Vanessa Reyes, and the whole thing assembled itself piece by piece into exactly the story Serena had refused to tell, but that the world was determined to tell anyway. Her phone rang. It was Priya, and she was laughing so hard she could barely speak. Serena, have you seen it? Have you seen what people are calling him?" "I've been trying not to look," Serena admitted. "They're calling him the $850 million mistake. It's trending. Serena, it's the #1 trending topic in the country. Not your name, not the deal. Him, the man who divorced his wife the morning she sealed the biggest biotech deal of the year." Priya could barely get the words out. "There's a meme. There are 1,000 memes. Somebody made a graphic that says, 'Check on your assumptions before you check out of your marriage.' He's going to be a cautionary tale in business schools, forever." And Serena, sitting on the edge of a hotel bed with her whole life transformed overnight, did not laugh. Because she had meant what she'd said in the boardroom. She had never wanted Mark to be the story, and the fact that he had become it despite everything, despite her refusal to hand him over, felt less like a victory and more like a kind of gravity, the natural consequence of a man's own actions, pulling him down into the exact hole he'd dug for himself. "I didn't want that," Serena said quietly. "I told them to keep his name out of it." "You did keep his name out of it," Priya said, and her voice softened. "That's the thing, Serena. You took the high road. You refused to name him, and he still ended up as the punchline because his own choices made him the punchline. That's not on you. You gave him the dignity of anonymity, and the world took it away, not because of anything you did, but because of everything he did. There's a lesson in that. The people who try to destroy you rarely need your help. Give them enough time, they destroy themselves." Serena was quiet for a moment. "How's Vanessa?" "Oh, Vanessa," Priya's voice hardened. "Vanessa is having a very bad week. Halloran Capital issued a statement yesterday afternoon distancing themselves from her. By this morning, she was on administrative leave. And the litigation package you handed Chimera, their legal team filed yesterday. Tortious interference, unfair business practices, and they're pushing the SEC to open an inquiry into whether Halloran manipulated a material transaction. Rebecca thinks Vanessa personally is looking at the end of her career, and Halloran is looking at a settlement that's going to cost them a great deal more than they ever hoped to make off you." A pause. "You destroyed them, Serena. Cleanly, legally, without ever raising your voice. And you did it all before the deal even closed." And there it was, the strange truth of the whole thing. Serena had won so completely that she had never had to fight. She had simply prepared and documented and waited and let the people who underestimated her walk directly into the traps their own arrogance had built. Mark had destroyed himself with a single sentence spoken in a kitchen. Vanessa had destroyed herself with a memo written 10 months too confidently, and Serena had done nothing but keep her records, keep her promise, and keep the lights off until the moment came to turn them on. The days that followed were a blur. There were interviews, though. Serena declined most of them. There were offers, endless offers, board seats and speaking engagements and magazine covers and a book deal so large it made even Julian Thorne raise his eyebrows. There were most meaningfully the messages, thousands of them from parents of children with rare diseases, from patients who had been told there was nothing to be done, from families who had sat by bedsides the way Serena had sat by Danny's, all of them writing to say the same thing in 1,000 different ways. Thank you. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for building this. Thank you for our children. Those were the ones Serena read. Every single one. She read them late at night alone, and she cried over many of them, and she answered as many as she could, and each one settled something in her chest, because each one was a small piece of the promise being kept, a small piece of Danny being honored, a small piece of the 25 years finally paying off. 3 weeks after this deal closed, the divorce was finalized. Mark did not contest it. His lawyer had apparently taken one look at the financial records Serena's team provided, one look at the sworn statement about support that Serena could disprove to the penny, and advised him in the strongest possible terms to accept a clean divorce and walk away with what little he had before it got worse. He had no claim to biotech. He never had. The company was separate property, funded by inheritance and a memorial fund, and outside capital protected by 8 years of documentation Serena had kept because her mother had told her to. Mark walked away from the marriage with the apartment, which was mortgaged to the hilt, and the car, which he was still paying off, and a name that had become a national punchline. And that was all. Serena never saw him again. She kept her word about that. But she heard about him occasionally, the way you hear about a distant weather system. She heard that Vanessa had cut all contact the moment the story broke, that the relationship Mark had blown up his marriage for had been exactly as Serena predicted, a tool that was discarded the instant it stopped being useful. She heard that he'd lost his position at the firm quietly, the kind of quiet exit that happens when a man becomes too much of a liability to keep around. She heard that he'd moved out of the city, and then after a while she stopped hearing about him at all, and that more than anything was the ending he'd earned. Not a villain, not a tragedy, just a small fading absence, a footnote. Exactly what she'd told the boardroom she wanted him to be. 2 months after the deal closed, Serena moved into the penthouse. She had not wanted it at first. It had felt like a cliché, the successful woman in her Manhattan penthouse, and Serena had spent her whole life avoiding clichés. But Priya had talked her into it, and so had, of all people, Julian Thorne, who had said in his blunt way, "Dr. Vance, you spent 8 years sleeping on a couch under a pile of research journals in an apartment your husband thought was his. You've earned a home that's entirely your own. Buy the penthouse. Not because you need to prove anything to anyone. Buy it because for the first time in your life, you can build something that's just for you with no one to answer to and no one to hide it from. You've spent your whole life building in the dark. Buy a place with a lot of windows." So she'd bought a place with a lot of windows, and on the first night she spent there alone, she stood at the glass and looked out over the city that had never once noticed her, when she was building the city that now knew her name. And she felt the strangest thing. She felt her mother beside her. Not literally, not a ghost, nothing like that, but the presence of her, the memory of her, the voice of her, all the things her mother had taught her assembled into a kind of company that filled the empty room. They laugh at the girl who builds in the dark. They don't laugh for long. A woman should own the things she makes all the way down to the ground. When you finally turn on the lights, turn them all the way on. Don't spend your life being small so that small men can feel large. "I did it, Mom," Serena said out loud to the glass and the city and the memory. "I turned on all the lights." And she thought about Danny. She always thought about Danny, but that night she thought about him differently, not with the old grief, the sharp grief of the bedside, but with something gentler. Because the Daniel and Eleanor Foundation had already in its first 2 months funded 3 new rare disease research programs, and one of them was targeting the exact condition that had killed her brother. In her lifetime, perhaps within a few years, there would be a treatment for the thing that had taken Danny. Children who would have died at 9 would grow up. They would become the people Danny never got to become. Men and women with whole lives. And somewhere in the machinery of the world, in the labs and the clinics and the families that would never know her name, the promise a 9-year-old girl had made at a bedside 25 years ago would keep on being kept long after Serena herself was gone. That was the thing Mark had never understood. That was the thing Vanessa had never understood. That was the thing almost no one understood about Serena Vance. She had never been building a company. She had never been chasing money or status or even success. She had been keeping a promise. And a person who is keeping a promise to someone they loved and lost cannot be stopped, cannot be bought, cannot be defeated because they are not fighting for themselves. They are fighting for the dead. And the dead ask nothing and give everything, and there is no force on earth stronger than a person building for a ghost. A year passed. BioAnce, under the protection of the Chimera acquisition and the ironclad covenant Serena had signed, flourished in a way it never could have as an independent company. The capital and the infrastructure that Chimera provided accelerated the science by years. Treatments that had been theoretical entered trials. Trials that had been small became large. And the mission held exactly as the poison pill guaranteed it would, because no board and no CEO could ever redirect the platform away from the rare diseases without triggering the reversion to the foundation. Serena had built something that could not be corrupted, could not be abandoned, could not be turned into just another profit engine. She had built something that would outlast her, and outlast Chimera, and outlast every person who had ever doubted her. She became, as the early coverage had predicted, one of the most powerful people in American biotech. But power had never interested her, and so she used it the way she used everything precisely and toward a single end. She funded research. She mentored young scientists, especially young women, especially the quiet ones, the invisible ones, the ones everyone overlooked because she knew better than anyone what those quiet women were capable of. She sat on the board of the foundation beside Julian Thorne, who at 69 had found in the last chapter of his life the purpose he'd been missing for 58 years, and the two of them, the old man who had broken his promise, and the young woman who had kept hers, worked side by side to make sure that no other brother and no other sister would ever have to be a promise instead of a person. Serena Vance never remarried. It was not a wound. It was a choice. She had learned something in her marriage to Mark that she never forgot, which was that a person who does not see you is more dangerous than a person who hates you, because hatred at least acknowledges that you exist. She would rather be alone than be unseen, and she was for the first time in her adult life entirely and completely at peace with being alone. Not lonely, alone. There is a difference, and Serena had earned the right to know it. She thought about Mark rarely now, but once about 18 months after everything she received a letter, an actual letter, handwritten, forwarded through her lawyers because he had no other way to reach her. She almost didn't open it. She held it for a long time, sitting at the glass in her penthouse, turning it over in her hands. And then she opened it because she was not afraid of him anymore, and because some part of her was curious what a man like Mark Sterling could possibly have to say after everything. It was short. He did not ask for anything. He did not try to explain himself or justify what he'd done or wheedle his way back into her life. He simply wrote that he had spent the last year and a half thinking about who he'd been and what he'd said to her that morning, and that he understood now in a way he never could have then exactly what he'd thrown away and exactly why he'd thrown it away. He wrote that the problem had never been that she was too small. The problem had been that he was too small to see how large she was, and that he'd needed her to be small so that he could feel large, and that when she'd finally revealed her size, it hadn't made him proud of her. It had made him feel worthless, and he'd hated her for it, before he'd understood that the worthlessness was his own and had nothing to do with her at all. He wrote that he was in therapy. He wrote that he was trying to become someone worth being, the way she'd told him to on the phone that day. And he wrote at the very end that he wasn't asking for forgiveness because he didn't deserve it and he knew it, but that he wanted her to know that the last thing she'd said to him about how someday he'd have to decide whether to tell someone the truth had stayed with him every single day, and that he had decided he would tell the truth always for the rest of his life, because it was the only way he'd found to live with himself. Serena read it twice, and then she set it down and she looked out at the city, and she felt to her surprise no anger and no satisfaction and no vindication. She felt only a quiet, distant compassion, the kind you feel for a stranger you read about in the news, because that was what Mark had become to her. A stranger. A man she'd once known in another life before she turned on the lights. She did not write back. There was nothing to write. But she did not throw the letter away either. She put it in a drawer and she left it there not as a wound and not as a trophy, but as a marker. A small piece of evidence that even the smallest man given enough time and enough consequence might sometimes occasionally begin the long work of becoming something more. She hoped he made it. She truly did. But it was no longer her business whether he did, and that too was a kind of freedom. On the second anniversary of the day, everything changed. Serena did something she had never done before. She went back to Colombia. Not for a ceremony, not for a speech, though she'd been asked to give plenty. She went back alone quietly, the way she'd done everything for so many years, and she walked the campus where she had spent so long being invisible, the quiet woman in the same 3 sweaters that no one bothered to remember. She walked to the building where she'd done her doctoral work, and she stood outside it, and she thought about the girl she'd been, the exhausted, invisible, relentless girl who had built an empire in the dark while the world told her she was nothing. And she realized that she did not miss that girl, but she was grateful to her. Grateful for every early morning and every stolen hour and every sacrifice and every dollar poured back into the company instead of spent on herself. Grateful for the receipts kept and the accounts kept separate and the promise kept. Grateful even for the marriage because the marriage had taught her the one lesson she might never have learned otherwise, which was that the belief of other people was not the source of her strength. She had built the whole thing while the person closest to her believed she was nothing, which meant that her strength had never depended on being believed in. It had come from somewhere else, from the promise, from the ghost, from her mother's voice and her brother's memory, and a place inside her so deep that no man's contempt could ever reach it. The moment he stopped believing in her, she had stopped needing him. And she understood now, standing outside the building where it had all begun, that she had never needed anyone's belief at all. She had only needed her own. Her phone buzzed. A text from Priya. "The trial results are in for the Daniel program. Serena, it's working. The treatment is working. Call me." Serena stood very still. She read the message 3 times the way she'd read the news alert about the deal 2 years before, except this time her hands were shaking, not with dread, but with something else entirely. Something that started in her chest and rose up through her throat and filled her eyes. The treatment for Danny's disease was working. Somewhere right now, a child who would have died was going to live. And another. And another. Children who would grow up, who would become the people they were meant to become. Men and women with whole lives because a 9-year-old girl had made a promise at a bedside and then spent 25 years in the dark keeping it. Serena Vance stood on the campus where she had once been invisible, and she looked up at the sky and she said very quietly to a brother who had been gone for 27 years now, "We did it, Danny. We finished it. You can rest now. I've got the rest of them. I promise." And then she wiped her eyes and she squared her shoulders and she walked out of the past and into the life she had built with her own 2 hands out of the dark and into the light. A woman who had been called nothing by a man who never once bothered to look, and who had become in silence and in patience and in unbreakable love for a boy she'd lost everything she was ever meant to be. She had been served divorce papers on the morning she sealed the deal of a lifetime. She had turned humiliation into empire betrayal, into freedom and grief, into a cure that would save thousands of children she would never meet. The man who called her a burden became a footnote. The woman who tried to steal her empire lost her own. And Serena Vance, the girl who built in the dark, walked into the rest of her life as one of the most powerful people in the world, untouchable, unstoppable, and finally completely free. She never needed him. She never needed any of them. She only ever needed the promise, and the promise at last was kept. And that is the whole picture.